Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and today I want to take you through part two of the Steelers draft psychology, almost kind of a special focus on what the Steelers are going to be doing on April 28th. That would be next Thursday, when the Steelers get to pick number 25 overall in the NFL draft. Now, if you happen to miss part one of this series, you could go back over to steelcityunderground.com or any of your favorite podcast providers, iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher. We also post the podcast over on YouTube to make it more accessible. And as of Monday, the Steel City Underground podcast is now available on Google Play Music. Now, as I understand it, there's still some bugs that are being worked out with Google's newest service, but Google now has podcasts. They've released that to the general public. It might still be considered a beta, and I understand that some people already are having trouble finding it on their phone. Rest assured, though, it's not something that I could actually handle, and it's a much larger Google problem. So go figure, right? But if you happen to miss the first part, went through all of the pre-draft visits that the Steelers have had. And at that point, I do believe at the time of the recording, the Steelers hadn't had all 30 of their maximum 30 draft visits that they're allowed. But now we are up to 30. They had 27, and the final three players came in on yesterday as of this recording on April 19th. So today is April 20th, and this will probably drop on April 21st in the morning. But just to go over that, if you're not familiar with the visitors that the Steelers have had out of their 30 official visits, we have made a nice free ebook that you could get. It's the Steel City Underground 2016 Draft Preview. If you go over to steelcityunderground.com, all 30 of those pre-draft visitors are now detailed in a 39-page draft guide. We also go over some other goodies such as the previous draft picks the Steelers have made, what position that they're going to be drafting in the 2016 draft, and a few other things that are really cool there. So you get to see everything. If the guys that they're visiting, you get a little bio, you get their stats, their height, their weight, what they did at the pro days, if they had any information out there on their pro days, the combine, and stuff of that nature. So just breaking that down, the Pittsburgh Steelers have visited mostly safeties and cornerbacks, but they have visited with a lot of defensive linemen. And it just appears by who their visitors are, and this was a hot topic of discussion, and even so that I decided to do another dual opinion where I debate this topic with Eric Herman over on Steelers Grind. And we talk about, and we're both in agreement here, that the Steelers are probably going to continue, much to the dismay of fans, they're going to continue avoiding taking a cornerback with their first round selection. Now, through last year, the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Kansas City Chiefs were the only two teams in the NFL that hadn't picked a cornerback in ages with their first-round selection. And the Chiefs broke that mold, taking Marcus Peters last season, and he ends up tying for a league lead in interceptions. So, good pick for the Chiefs. Worked out well for them. They actually drafted ahead of the Steelers, so Marcus Peters was never anywhere on the Steelers' radar, and I doubt that they would make a drastic trade when they feel that they're going to take the best player available with that. They value their draft picks, okay? So we're getting into the psychology of general manager Kevin Colbert, head coach Mike Tomlin, and the rest of their staff, and why does Kevin Colbert avoid drafting cornerbacks on day one of the NFL draft? And I know we're all anxious. We all know the pass defense was not very good last year. Only two teams in the NFL, the New Orleans Saints and the New York Giants, had worse pass defenses. And if you're a regular listener here, and I appreciate if you are, you understand where I have been at, where my position's been. As far as the corners, I think the guys that we have right now, William Gay, We've re-signed him to a 3-year deal. Ross Cockrell signed for 1 more year. This was a guy that the Steelers were originally looking at drafting, passed on. The Bills dropped him, and the Steelers got him back. He's boomeranged back to this team, and I think he's going to end up being a very solid contributor. I don't know if it'll just be for the short term or the long term, but just looking for 2016, the Steelers are at least set maybe on the outside. You have a guy that could play outside or on that nickel position, that slot wide receiver in Senquez Golson, who was a second-round draft choice last year, fulfilling many of our wants and desires to have a cornerback. But don't forget, too, that the Steelers also had invested a 4th-round draft pick in Doran Grant out of Ohio State. And Doran Grant was on and off the practice squad. And just to kind of give you an idea of how teams are always manipulating their rosters throughout the year, you're going to cut someone from your practice squad. You're going to cut someone from the 53-man roster, call up, and guys are going to move around. I think Ross Ventrone was cut 3 or 4 times last year. And if you remember, Ross is a very solid special teams contributor with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he's somebody that they obviously value at least having there for practice. But getting to Doran Grant, it's kind of obvious to me, and with also Anthony Chiquillo, who I talked about in one of the previous podcasts a week ago with Chick and also Doran Grant. These guys were on the practice squad and then called up to the 53-man roster. And I do believe the reason that the Steelers did that is to try and avoid a situation where maybe they lose a player that they actually value quite a bit. Obviously, they drafted these guys. They're not even college free agents, but somebody that they drafted enough that they wanted to protect under the 53-man roster. Because if they're on the practice squad, and many of you may not be aware of this, when a player is on a practice squad, he's kind of unprotected. Even though he's technically on the Steelers practice squad, it doesn't mean that any other NFL team just can't come in and offer that player a spot on their 53-man roster. And it's exactly what happened the previous year when the Steelers had brought in a college free agent, Josh Morrow, who was a defensive end. I believe he came out of Stanford. And a lot of people actually thought the Steelers were going to just straight up draft him. But either way, he comes into the Steelers camp. The Steelers like him. The Steelers offer him a practice squad spot. And much like many players that have come through the Steel City, he ends up over at the Arizona Cardinals. He actually started a few games, last season, and he's made an okay career for himself as far as that goes. There's nothing against that. It's just the business of football. But getting to the cornerbacks, and this is kind of long-winded and going full circle, the Steelers thought enough of Doran Grant to protect him and put him on the 53-man roster. So we're talking about William Gay, Ross Cockrell, Senquez Golson, and then Doran Grant. So you have 4 corners already, and you may have a need for another one. And I'm not saying the Steelers aren't going to draft a corner. But what we're trying to get into thinking is, why doesn't Kevin Colbert just blow? Your best pick is your first-round pick. I think most people know the first round is going to be the best. It should be the best of the best, right? And you don't always get it right in the first round. And I think that's where Kevin Colbert was originally burned, and the reason why he kind of avoids the first rounders. I mean, you take a look at some of the top guys in the NFL, and I'm going to bring up just 2 names real quick off the top of my head. You look at Richard Sherman and Josh Norman. They're considered among the best corners in the league, right? So Richard Sherman and Josh Norman, they weren't taken on day 1, round 1. They weren't taken on day 2 even, rounds 2 and 3. They were taken on the 3rd day of the draft, and they were both 5th-round draft picks. It's kind of like all the people that passed on Antonio Brown. You wonder, how on earth did Antonio Brown become a 6th-round draft pick? So a lot of people pat Kevin Colbert on the back and, hey, you drafted Antonio Brown. And when you're looking at it the same way, I'm going to go through some of these picks that Kevin Colbert made. And it may seem like a little silly, but I don't want to count day 3 players, because not many day 3 players end up being a Richard Sherman, a Josh Norman, or AB. Okay, it's just a fact of life. And when you do find one of those, then you're considered like a genius. And Kevin Colbert has obviously had his own good track record, which I've expounded upon many times throughout the blog and the podcasts, about all the different guys he's taken. He's taken guys that have been franchise players, Pro Bowlers, and future Hall of Famers, Super Bowl MVPs, you name it. Kevin Colbert has done an awesome job as a GM. You're not going to hit every single draft pick. And when you go through the round that a player's taken and how many years they last in the NFL, there's going to be a neat chart that I'm going to put out here shortly. That's going to have a lot of this same information in a blog post, and I want everybody to go take a look at that table when it is released, because what we have here is a layout of, if you're taken in the first round, in fact, year one, it goes from 99.7%. You're more than likely, if you're taken in the first round, you're making the roster. There are very few guys that don't make the roster that are picked in the first round. There are exceptions. And even the second and third round, fourth round, and then that's at 91.4% year one, fourth round. And then 5 through 7, I mean, the seventh round picks, a lot of seventh round picks don't make the NFL roster. It's just slightly above half, 58.3% in the first year. So when you're looking at rounds 5, 6, and 7, you get into year 2, fifth round picks now drop to about half. Year 3, 37.8, 24.3, and 16.2. So aside from first and second round picks in year 5, if you get 5 years out of a player, when it comes to an average NFL career, the third round draft picks, only 18.8%, about 1 in 5, end up playing 5 years in the NFL. Okay, 37.5, 1 in 3 end up playing 4 years. So most teams are going to give these guys a chance, maybe 3 or 4 years, and then they're going to cut their losses. We saw the Steelers cut their losses with Dre Archer, and he barely lasted 2 years. Okay. So they released him. So looking at players that are being drafted on day 3 or rounds 5, 6, and 7, it's just not very good for this exercise. And plus, we only have so much time and so many people to talk about. Kevin Colbert has been the GM of the Steelers since I believe it was like 2000 or 2001. So he's been here, 15, 16, 17 years. Okay. I'm sorry I don't have it right in front of me, but he's been around a very long time. I think. Actually, I want to say maybe 2002 was his first year now that I'm looking at some of the numbers. So we're going to look at the players that were drafted by Kevin Colbert in rounds 1, 2, and 3. And the last time he took a non-day 3 draft pick as a defensive back, it was Curtis Brown in 2011, Curtis Brown being a third-round draft choice. Curtis Brown tore his ACL 2 years later and was released. The Jets showed him some interest. He didn't end up making the team. And he currently he ended up playing in the Canadian Football League. So continued to play football at a high level, but he just didn't make it in the NFL, and he got hurt. Those type of things happen. The very next time that the Steelers went and looked at a corner in that same type of category was 2009. So we're going back a little bit further. 2 years before Curtis Brown, in the third round, Keenan Lewis was selected. Now, Keenan Lewis got some playing time. There were injuries to other corners. Most notably, I think Ike Taylor was banged up during that amount of time. And so you had a third-round draft choice that got on the field maybe a lot sooner than maybe even the Steelers would have liked. And when that happens, you have players that are only signed in those rounds to maybe 3 or 4 year contracts. And when they perform at a high level, as Keenan Lewis was with his time with the Pittsburgh Steelers, they become very valuable. And when they become valuable and you have other players on your team, when you think about that period of time when the Steelers were also dealing with trying to keep Antonio Brown and what to do with Mike Wallace and Emmanuel Sanders, and they had guys that were leaving, or you're restructuring Troy Polamalu or Heath Miller, guys that are franchise-type players, there's not a whole lot of money to go around. So Keenan Lewis ends up going to the New Orleans Saints, which they may not have been able to prevent anyways. Keenan Lewis, he's a native of Louisiana, so he may have been going home anyways, and I understand that. But 5 years, $26.3 million contract. Show me the money, right? That's how it goes. So when you go even further back and try to figure out why the Steelers stay away from defensive backs, Kevin Colbert drafted 3 in his first 4 years as a general manager. And this is after taking Ben Roethlisberger, Heath Miller, and Santonio Holmes. He took DBs in the second round, right after those first-round picks. So he's got Big Ben, he's got Heath, and he's got Santonio. And then the very next round, he's going after defensive backs, either safeties or corners, okay? Ricardo Coakley, Bryant McFadden, and Anthony Smith were those picks. So he invests some high draft picks. Not a high return. Bryant McFadden's the only guy out of those three, out of Coakley and Anthony Smith, Bryant McFadden's the only one who was a contributor with the 3 Super Bowl appearances, obviously winning 2 of those. The other 2 guys you may as well consider, and I hate using the word, but you probably consider those guys draft busts, okay? Because they just, for one reason or another, they just didn't make it. When you look at Kevin Colbert and what he's done in the second round of the NFL drafts during his entire body of work with the Pittsburgh Steelers, he's had a much, much better track record when he doesn't take a player who plays in the secondary. Even go back to last year, we don't know what Senquez Golden is yet. We don't know who he is as a player. He got hurt in training camp, never got to play in a regular season. So we're still going to discover this may be almost like the Madden curse. You may as well put these guys on the cover and they're done, right? Okay. The other guys, the other players, the other positions, anybody who doesn't play in a defensive secondary, round 2 picks, Lamar Woodley, Limas Swede, wait, I'm coming back to it, Jason Worlds, Marcus Gilbert, Mike Adams, Le'Veon Bell, Stephon Tuitt, and, of course, Senquez Golson. Now, of those, we know Limas Swede was bad. Just had whatever personal issues, and that just did not work out. It's okay. That happens. The other picks in that draft did work out. And then Mike Adams, who was taken right after David DeCastro, of course. David DeCastro, a Pro Bowler this year. Mike Adams didn't really work out either, and he was hurt all last year, and I expect the Steelers to cut ties with him, if they hadn't already. But everybody else, I mean, Jason Worlds, he's okay, above average, right? I think we could agree with that. He was going to get a huge payday from someone if it wasn't us, and he decides to retire, right? So obviously someone found him to be valuable, same way they found Keenan Lewis to be valuable. Marcus Gilbert, very good. Lamar Woodley, the guy was like a defensive MVP. He ran roughshod over the NFL a couple years there, and then, his injuries derailed his career. Le'Veon Bell. What else can you say? Hopefully injuries don't derail his career. The future certainly has been looking bright for that young man. Stephon Tuitt, I would say the same for him as well. So, of those, well, a lot of the players outside of that, those first 2 rounds, they don't stick around very long. And so what Kevin Colbert's been trying to do is reduce his risk of taking one of these luxury type picks. Just kind of think of where the Steelers are picking 25 overall. So think of where they pick in relation to where other teams are drafting these corners and getting these, so-called superstar players. The Steelers they haven't even always been in the top 20 picks. This year, they're going to pick number 25 overall. They're even behind Cincinnati. Cincinnati's picking at 24. How many corners are going to go before the Steelers have their choice? Are they going to settle for maybe the 5th best corner or 6th best corner on the board? Or perhaps they might take the 1st or 2nd best player available at another position. There are certainly other needs, and we detailed those in the first edition of the podcast, the first half of this. So, when the Steelers hit on one, Kevin Colbert hits on a draft pick, they should get praise. And if he misses, should we really care when he's consistently hitting in other rounds or consistently finding franchise players? The Steelers are going to go with the best player available. And if that happens to be a cornerback, I think everyone's going to take a deep, deep sigh of relief and say, finally. But, guys, if you've seen the Heath Ledger Joker in those Christopher Nolan Batman movies, don't lose your mind if the Steelers happen to go another direction than cornerback in the 2016 NFL Draft, because I've just showed you why. Thank you for listening. And once again, guys, We're about a week away from the NFL draft. If you want to check out some of those pre-draft visitors that the Steelers have had, 30 bios, 39-page ebook for free. Go to steelcityunderground.com right now. Sign up for it. All I'm asking for is your name and your email address. That'll be shot right over to you. You can download it, you can read it, and you can see exactly the type of psychology and the type of players that the Steelers are looking for to fill the holes in their organization.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.